Hey, it's Megan. Welcome back. If we haven't met before, I'm a professional writer, editor, and writing coach. Today we're looking at the Summation poem from the Tortured Poets Department. And y'all know I love a good poem. I'm a published poet myself, so I thought it would be fun to look through this poem and see what we think. At this hearing, I stand before my fellow members of the Tortured Poets Department with a summary of my findings, a debrief, a detailed rewinding, for the purpose of warning, for the sake of reminding. Okay, so immediately my first question is, who are these fellow members? With a summary of my findings, so to me that implies research, discovery, searching, compiling, reflecting. That's what that kind of makes me think of. When you debrief something, it's always after the fact and you kind of go through whatever happened. And if you're debriefing it, you're breaking down, okay, what happened? How do we feel about it? What conclusions are we drawing about it? What can we learn and apply to whatever we do next? That kind of comes to mind for me with debriefing. A detailed rewinding, so we are going back in time for the purpose of warning, for the sake of reminding. I love that rhyme between rewinding and reminding. That's really nice. Scratches my brain just right. This first opening stanza, especially the line for the purpose of warning, reminded me of a lot of Shakespearean prologues where you kind of get a similar vibe of like, I'm sort of telling you what's about to happen ahead of time to give you, it's not really a warning, I guess, but to give you an overview of what to expect before you watch this play. Thinking of like Romeo and Juliet, where they say like what we've just said is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. I'm going to remind you of what happened and I'm going to warn you in some way, which makes sense for a debrief. As you might all unfortunately recall, it's a really nice inline rhyme there, all recall, I had been struck with a case of a restricted humanity, which explains my plea here today of temporary insanity. Ooh! Okay, that's fun. I like those rhymes, again, of humanity and insanity. So let me just look at the rhyme scheme here. We get, let me see, A, B, C, D, D, E, D. So whenever you're trying to figure out the rhyme scheme of a poem, you assign a letter to the ending sound. So you start with A, the first line is always A. And then when there's a new sound at the end of a line that doesn't rhyme with that, you give it the next letter. And if it rhymes, you give it the same letter. So for instance, with a summary of my findings is going to be the same letter as reminding and rewinding. That's why I said, so it's A, B, C, D, D, E, D. So cool. So then in her second stanza, we'll see if she's doing the same thing. She goes, well, first of all, we have fewer lines here. So recall, case, humanity, today, insanity. So no, she does not follow the same rhyme scheme, but she has the same kind of rhyme scheme going on in her last 3 lines, where the 2 on top and bottom, the third from the bottom and the last line of the stanza rhyme. That's consistent so far. We have rewinding, reminding, and humanity, insanity. All right. So let's talk about what she's saying. So they don't want to recall it. It is an unfortunate thing to recall. We might expect that because she says she's going to give us a warning. Here she's leading us into the rewinding, right? The debrief is starting. It's the summary of her findings, and in order to do that, we have to step back and look at what has happened. I had been struck with a case of restricted humanity. So, I mean, there's so much to unpack in the word humanity. But if it's restricted, what that tells me most is the entirety of her, because she is a human, she has humanity, that was restricted, and so she in her entirety was restricted, which explains my plea here today. That's interesting to me because she said the purpose of presenting these findings, which she has compiled, was to debrief, to warn, and to remind. But here, it almost seems like the purpose is to explain herself, to exonerate herself, to free herself from, almost a conviction, because she's pleading temporary insanity. So that would imply that she's on trial for something and she's going to be found guilty, but she's pleading temporary insanity. So I find that to be disconnected from the purpose she stated above. It's a really small thing, but it's something worth noting if you're writing a poem, if you're writing a story, whatever it is, an essay even, whatever you set up as like, this is what my story is about, this is what my essay is about, You want to keep that consistent throughout. So I think if I was editing this poem, I might try to see, could we tweak some of that opening stanza to make it more about her being on trial, potentially being found guilty of something. It just would give it a little bit more urgency, because pleading temporary insanity because you're on trial for something has a lot more urgency than just, I'm presenting my findings about something. So, and I think that's more compelling personally in a story or in a poem like this. So that's what I would say. When she says struck with a case of restricted humanity, it ties restricted humanity to like a disease. You know, I was struck with a case of the measles, I was struck with a case of the flu, but I was struck with a case of restricted humanity. That's why I acted temporarily insane. So what's great is that sets us up to be like, well, what happened? Why was your humanity restricted, and how did this temporary insanity play out? So hopefully she talks about that a little bit more. She says, you see, the pendulum swings. Oh, the chaos it brings leads the caged beast to do the most curious things. There we get some nice rhymes again of swings, brings, and things. And she's still keeping that rhyme scheme a little bit there at the end, with the third line from the end of the stanza rhymes with the last line of the stanza. So we like that. We have the chaos it brings, the most curious things. When a pendulum swings, we're going from one extreme to another. The restricted humanity was one extreme, and then the pendulum swung into temporary insanity, and she did something where her humanity was not restricted at all. That's what I would kind of get from that. It's not like we're landing in the middle. We're going from one side all the way over to the other side, but also maybe time is passing as well. She says, oh, the chaos it brings. So, okay, yes. So I would imagine then that it is going from one extreme to another, because that can be quite chaotic. All right, leads the caged beast to do the most curious things. Caged beast connects back to restricted humanity, but is different. Restricted humanity, human, caged beast. We would assume a beast is not human, so it's almost taking it down a little level there, taking the humanity out of it, honestly. That makes me think restricted humanity was more human when she was restricted. That was more refined, human, non-chaotic. Once the pendulum swung, it was chaos, it was beast. The humanity was taken out of it. Does that make sense? Words she's using like chaos, caged beast tell me that even though the humanity was restricted here, once it was released, there was still a lacking of humanity. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but anyway, that's just what I'm thinking. Curious things. We're not saying it's bad. We're not saying it's great. It's curious. Like, maybe we want to step back and think about that. Maybe there's more to explore there. I think that's an intentional word that she chose. The most curious things. Lovers spend years denying what's ill-fated. Resentment rotting away galaxies we created. Stars placed and glued meticulously by hand next to the ceiling fan. Lovers, plural, means they both knew it was ill-fated and they denied that. And that led to resentment, one of the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. And it ties into lyrics like holding tight to your quiet resentment. She says, resentment rotting away galaxies we created. That's a great verb. Rotting takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. Slowly but surely something decays over time until it's rotted. Oh my gosh. And it rotted the galaxies we created. That reminds me of the line from Peter. Something, something, something underneath the same moon in different galaxies. Perhaps because she was in this galaxy with this person. Anywho, stars placed and glued meticulously by hand next to the ceiling fan. So here we start getting real good. This builds on galaxies we created. Now she's going into that. So we're starting kind of broad and we're getting more specific. And we're getting into, I guess, a more specific idea. It's not just here's an overview of what happened in general. It's like now I'm really starting to tell you the story. We placed every single star on that fake sky right next to the ceiling fan, so that's how we know it wasn't real, right? We glued them on so that they would stick meticulously. So we were very attentive to detail when we did this. We did this very intentionally. So we built this fake galaxy, and then we tried to wish on comets. We tried dimming the shine, tried to orbit his planet. Some stars never align. So this extended analogy or metaphor of the fake galaxy as their relationship, or the hope maybe that they had in their relationship, continues through here and we get more of a picture of why it rotted away. They denied it was ill-fated, which I think is cool because if something's fated, you might say that it's written in the stars. But here they are putting up fake stars and trying to see it written themselves. Maybe they're trying to write it in the stars. But I think what's interesting in this stanza of tried wishing, tried dimming, tried to orbit is that I think we're switching from lovers denying multiple people and we're getting just into her. So I tried wishing on comets. I tried dimming the shine, like making the stars not as bright, which is really sad. It reminds me of I saw in my mind fairy lights through the mist. I can almost see the shine of the lights, but not quite. Tried to orbit his planet, which I think is really a great way of saying everything revolved around him. Reminds me of pulled him in tighter each time he was drifting away. What I think is the coolest thing about this poem is how we get tie-ins to the different songs on this album woven into the poem. I think that's really cool. All right, so we're getting a sense of what happened in this tumultuous relationship. And she says, in one conversation, I tore down the whole sky. So she destroyed it, not him. She ended the relationship. So that's a huge turning point in this story, this debrief we're getting so far. And I think that summarizes the section where she's saying, I'd been struck with a case of restricted humanity. Here's what that was like. Now I'm assuming we will get into the temporary insanity that ensued. So, spring sprung forth with dazzling freedom hues, then a crash from the skylight bursting through. Something old, someone hallowed, who told me he could be brand new. Okay, let's unpack that. So spring sprung forth with dazzling freedom hues. That made me think of the start of her Eras tour, which I believe started in spring. And it also her set list started with Miss Americana, which feels dazzling in freedom hues, right? Miss Americana. And then a crash from the skylight. So a skylight is a window installed in your ceiling or your roof. So this guy is appearing seemingly from the heavens through the skylight. And then we look at the word choice like crash, bursting through. That makes me think it wasn't expected, right? He didn't knock on the skylight and say, hey, can I come in? Hey, nice to see you. He burst through there. Almost like she didn't even have a choice. She couldn't even crack the window open for him. He crashed right through it. So we can see there how word choice creates a completely different interpretation. Something old, someone hallowed, who told me he could be brand new. Those lines give me just the most subtle thought of something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, which is what brides have. And we all know that there is a lot of wedding imagery and talk in her songs in this album. You swore that you loved me, but where were the clues? I died on the altar, waiting for the proof, talking cribs and talking cradles or whatever it is. So that's what that immediately made me think of, like, oh, wedding talk. Anyway, someone hallowed. I think this is a great line because it ties into so many parts of the album. To be hallowed is to be greatly, greatly revered. You're so honored. You are on par with God. Or even we could say you're made holy. I think that ties into so much religious imagery that is throughout this entire album. She says things like, you holy ghost, you stand-up guy. What if the way you hold me is actually what's holy? Your good Lord doesn't need to lift a finger. I can fix him. No, really, I can. She said, I would have died for your sins. So there's a lot in this album where this person she's talking about seems like he was put on this huge pedestal. Like he broke in through the skylight to come rescue her. He was this holy ghost. He was this savior figure. Perhaps some of what was temporary insanity was thinking that this person was an angel-like figure who promised her he could be someone brand new. And that, believing that was part of what was obviously, she was like, I must have been insane to think that. That's what I'm getting from all those lines. Whew! One more thing, who told me he could be brand new also reminds me of when you blew in with the winds of fate and told me I reformed you. Again, reformed you, I made you holy. And it also reminds me of the line, the coward claimed he was a lion. Like you told me you could be what I needed, and you proceeded to play that guy, and then you failed. So I was out of the oven and into the microwave. So again, right, the pendulum has swung. We're getting polar opposites. The oven is where you cook things at lower temperatures for a longer amount of time. The microwave is extremely high temperatures for a very short amount of time. So we see the pendulum swinging. So she's repeating that idea, but using a different analogy, out of the slammer and into a tidal wave. So again, a swinging between two things that are not similar at all. That one isn't as strong to me, out of the slammer and into a tidal wave, only because those two things, at least for me, are not related. If she was like out of the slammer and into the bank robbery, I don't know, like something where you could see how they're related thematically, but they connect to the songs on the album. Fresh out the slammer. In Guilty as Sin, where she says, building up like waves crashing over my grave. How gallant to save the Empress from her gilded tower. I feel like these words are all very intentionally selected. Gallant is a word you would really only hear used to describe a man, and it means brave, heroic, chivalrous. And I hear nothing but sarcasm here. Maybe because I've already heard her say the coward claimed he was a lion, and lions similarly are symbols of bravery and courage. And then she says to save the Empress, and my first thought was, why Empress and not Queen? I think she has used Queen a lot, not even just in this album. Once your queen has come, you treat her like an also-ran. So I looked it up, and an Empress's authority is usually larger than a queen's. So she usually has control over more land, and she's actually a higher rank than a queen. So to me, that communicates that she's like the highest of the high. And whoever this person was who broke in through the skylight of her gilded tower thought that he could save her. Swinging a sword he could barely lift. It's like, she is an empress, and this little dweeb over here like can't even hold up a sword, and he thinks he's gonna save her? Do we see the sarcasm coming through this? Oh my gosh, it's so savage. The other word she chose very intentionally, I think, is gilded, from her gilded tower. When something is gilded, it has a thin layer of gold over top of it, or something that looks like gold. It tends to mean that it's not really genuine or like luxurious. It's more superficial. It's more just for show. There's nothing really valuable underneath it. And gilded tower refers back to restricted humanity, caged beast, and now she's an empress in a tower. So we're getting a lot of different ways of saying the same thing, and I kind of wish there was more continuity between those things. Like, we're going from caged beast to empress in a tower. It's like, those are so different. Maybe that is part of the pendulum swinging. Maybe at one point she thought she was as a caged beast, and then she swung back to seeing herself as an empress. That could be one reading, I guess. But then she says, swinging a sword he could barely lift. Right, so he is not qualified to save the Empress from her gilded tower, and yet here he is crashing in, breaking through, and trying to swing his sword around. It's giving secondhand embarrassed. She says, but loneliness struck at that fateful hour, low-hanging fruit on his wine-stained lips. I'm assuming here that the fateful hour is midnight. All throughout this stanza, she's giving us kind of fairy tale imagery. The princess, the empress, locked away in her tower, and the gallant knight with his sword coming to rescue her. That's very fairy tale. So what is the most fateful hour in a fairy tale that we all know? Midnight, right? That's when Cinderella turns back into her pumpkin. No. Her carriage turns into a pumpkin. That's when Cinderella turns into a pumpkin. Low-hanging fruit on his wine-stained lips. This line made me ponder. I ponder this line. So he said something that made the loneliness strike. I also like the idea of loneliness struck, kind of like a clock is struck on the hour. We have struck elsewhere, right? I've been struck with a case of restricted humanity, and then I was struck with loneliness. So maybe those things are meant to draw parallels. That's an aside. So this is what I'm getting from this line. He was drunk when he said something that ended their relationship. It made loneliness strike. And if it was low-hanging fruit, that implies to me that it was the easiest thing he could have done. That's what low-hanging fruit means. Imagine you're picking apples off a tree. The lowest hanging apple is the easiest one to grab. Ugh. gross. But another meaning for low-hanging fruit, which I think is wild, is a person who can be won over or persuaded with very little effort. So I think there's a lot to be read into those three words, but what I take from that is he swung in, he crashed in, he was like, I'm gonna save you, I'm brand new, woo, I'm the best, here's my sword. And then very, very easily he was like, I'm over it, I'm done. Clock is striking midnight, I'm turning back into a pumpkin. The next section, he never even scratched the surface of me. None of them did. That, I would say, is pretty self-explanatory. What that tells me is she's never felt really deeply known or seen or loved. That right there, I think, summarizes loneliness struck. Or I guess not summarizes it, it expands on that. So loneliness struck, here's what that felt like. That's what it says to me. In summation, it was not a love affair, I screamed while bringing my fists to my coffee-ringed desk. It was a mutual manic phase. It was self-harm. It was house and then cardiac arrest. So we start with a quote. We're quoting now. Seems interesting to go from I'm in the tortured poets department giving my findings, here's the summary, to now I'm in the scene where I actually had the epiphany. We are no longer recalling the details, we are in that moment with her. So what that would say to me is that this is the most important moment. It's no longer someone telling you the story, it's like you are in the story as it's happening. That's what this line kind of does. She brings her fists to her coffee-ringed desk. I love that 3-word descriptor, coffee-ringed desk, because it implies more than one cup of coffee. Like this has been probably keeping her up at night. She's sitting at her desk, compiling information, thinking, racking her brains, drinking more coffee until she has this conclusion. It was not a love affair. It was a mutual manic phase. It was self-harm. It was house and then cardiac arrest. I almost think this is a mini summary. I mean, she did say, in summation, it was not a love affair, which makes me think of the crashing through the skylight love affair. But I think maybe she's talking us through the beginning, middle, and end of this whole story. So it was a mutual manic phase. I would imagine that refers possibly to when we created galaxies and we meticulously placed every single star and we were in denial for years and we were lovers. And that led into self-harm where I dimmed the shine and I tried to orbit your planet. And in one conversation, I tore the whole sky down. And it was house arrest, right? It was house, then cardiac arrest. So it was house arrest. I was a caged beast with restricted humanity in my gilded tower. Or if it's following the flow, it would be I put myself on house arrest after that relationship ended. And then it came into cardiac arrest, a sudden, painful experience of the heart. So I almost wonder if she's giving us a breakdown of the beginning, middle, and end. I'd be really curious to know what you think about that. She says, a smirk creeps onto this poet's face because it's the worst men that I write best. So that also makes me think those 3 lines were a summary of both sides of the pendulum, because she says it's the worst men that I write best. She's turning her pain into poetry. What this tells me is the epiphany and understanding of what happened and why allows her to create, which then allows her to heal and move on. And too, I think with that, it's also an act of vengeance in a way. It's her way of getting back at them for what happened, because she says a smirk creeps onto my face. It's not, and then I sighed happily and I was like, great, well now I understand, I'm gonna write a poem about it and keep it to myself. Like, no, if there's one thing she likes, it's revenge. So, and okay, this is the part that she reads aloud, so let's listen to her reading this part of the poem.
And so I enter into evidence, my tarnished coat of arms, my muses acquired like bruises, my talismans and charms, the tick, tick, tick of love bombs, my veins of pitch black ink. All's fair in love and poetry. Sincerely, the chairman of the Tortured Poets Department.
All right, so now she's bringing us back to sort of how we started. So we're bookending this poem with investigative language. The evidence is a coat of arms, muses, talismans, Charms, tick, tick, tick of love bombs, not the love bombs themselves, but the sounds of the love bombs, and her veins of pitch black ink. So that, all of that is what she is presenting as evidence. What do those even mean? A coat of arms was primarily used in battle to signify like what family or group you belong to. So it's an identity signifier. And over time, it's been used for family descent, different alliances, property ownership, and eventually, too, it's been used to give an indicator of what profession you're in. So maybe her tarnished coat of arms is something to do with being a poet. Her muses acquired like bruises, so all of the harmful things that have hurt her but have inspired her to create. Talismans are objects that are said to bring good luck or have magical powers. Usually it's something small like a ring or a stone. And then charms are small ornaments, right? Like on a charm bracelet. Charms could also be like spells, but when it's paired with talismans, it makes me think it's more of an ornament than something else. And then the tick, tick, tick of love bombs. I love that. That's an onomatopoeia, so it's using a sound effect by writing out what the sound sounds like, tick, tick, tick. And it's love bombs, so someone lavishing you with attention and affection to manipulate or influence you. Kind of ties back to low-hanging fruit and that other way of reading it that we talked about, where it could be somebody who's easily won over or easily persuaded. Same idea. And her veins of pitch black ink, and she's a writer. It's so deeply in her that it runs through her veins. I also think it's interesting that her blood is not red, which is a common symbol of life, love. It's black, which is usually a symbol of death and darkness. Let's go back for a second. When she says, I submit into evidence, all of these things, and this is leading us into the album, I would assume that all of these are somehow represented in the album in some way. My challenge to you is to see if you can find all of these represented in a song in some way. References to her own identity, her family, or alliances, that would be the coat of arms, her profession. References to the relationships that have hurt her the most, that have become her muses. References to good luck charms that she has. The tick, tick, tick of a love bomb, so not quite the bomb itself, but almost the warning sounds of the bomb. And then, of course, her own vulnerability and her own words, which I guess are seen through everything because she's written it. The last thing we'll talk about, All's Fair in Love and Poetry, is a play on All's Fair in Love and War. So instead of war, she's making poetry. That is how she goes to battle with her coat of arms. That's how she swings her sword. Her sword is a pen. And that phrase, all's fair in love and war, is attributed to a poet named John Lilly. But he wrote, the rules of fair play do not apply in love and war. So a little bit different. We have changed it over time to be all's fair in love and war. And she's tweaking that a little bit here, all's fair in love and poetry. But the point of that is to draw a connection between what was changed. So instead of love and war, it's love and poetry. And that line reminds me too of this, a smirk creeps up my face, and I think it's the worst men that I write the best, right? So a sense of like, I am about to get back at you with my poetry. All right, so that's the opening poem from the Tortured Poets Department. Please, please, please let me know what you thought as well. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love these as well, and I will see you next time. Take care.